Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is part 3 of our exploration of Asian horror films released during 2011, and it will include my personal favorites from this particular year. Now, I mentioned in previous videos that it was questionable as to whether or not there were any newer classics from this year. After rewatching a bunch of them, I think that there are two contenders for that designation. I really think that the final few films that I'm covering this evening are actually very impressive and worthy of making anyone's top list of, favorite Asian horror films from the 2010s. Also, a few of the other films tonight that I'm covering have a pretty big fan base. So as usual, if anything sounds interesting to you, feel free to check it out. So let's get started here. And as always, titles for all the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. And the first film tonight is one that is a little bit different, and that is Henge, also known as Metamorphosis. This is from Japan. Keiko is an ordinary housewife, but her husband, Yoshiaki, is having a nightmarish seizure every few days. He seems to be slowly beginning to lose his grip on humanity. And not only that, his body is also transforming into a monster. So when regaining his consciousness after these violent seizures, he describes the feeling as to be like bugs slowly taking over his mind. That cannot be good. If a cure for his affliction cannot be found, bad things are going to happen. So our main man here goes through a variety of treatments, as anyone would, including hypnotherapy. So this actually has some similarities to the last film that I covered in part 2 of this video, Tomie, because we have a protagonist who is aggressively seeking a cure for his grisly, unconventional ailments. Fortunately, our man here gets support from his wife and his doctor friend, so that's good. And their handling of the situation overall is actually quite logical and kind of realistic, despite the unrealistic premise. So this is a good humanoid monster film overall, with some big surprises which prove to be the highlights. A few of the scenes here are gloriously ridiculous, and I do think that they work. Definitely some creativity on display as well, and that helps to make it memorable. Now, the acting is generally good here. There are a lot of seizures that our protagonist suffers throughout the film, which is kind of difficult to convincingly portray if you're an actor. But I think our lead did a pretty good job here. One thing I will say is those seizure scenes, there's a handful of them, and you may feel that that's a little bit of a repetitive aspect to the film. So that might be a little bit of a negative on the viewer's part. Most of the special effects are actually practical, with a few exceptions, so I appreciated that. There are some sound effects during the transformation scenes that were a little bit over the top, and perhaps slightly unintentionally funny, but I liked them. This film, a trend for this year, as we've seen, very short runtime, only 53 minutes long, which makes it an easy sit. And it's a bit different, a nice change of pace for anyone out there who wants something, to mix things up. So I do recommend Henge, and I do enjoy it quite a bit. Now, the availability of this one is that it is available on Amazon streaming. Now, our next film tonight is from South Korea, and it has a good fan base behind it. It's very popular, and I think to a degree rightfully so, and that is White Melody of Death, also known as The Melody of the Curse, and it's, of course, from South Korea. So a teen singer finds this obscure music video and plagiarizes it to score her pop group's first big hit, but the origins of the song subsequently haunt the members. So we're introduced to this girl band, I guess you could call them, during a televised singing competition, I think, where they promptly get schooled by another girl group. So consequently, these ladies are kind of on the edge of just breaking up and moving on, but the aforementioned discovery of a catchy music number miraculously makes them overnight sensations. But, of course, this is a horror film, and there's some otherworldly curse that's going to terrorize them. So much of this film centers around pop stars and their internal conflicts, so some viewers may not find them interesting, but I thought the story and the characters were good in this. As popular as J-pop and K-pop are, you don't see too many Asian horror films that use that as a main premise. You know what I mean? You do see J-pop and K-pop stars in horror movies acting in them, you know what I mean? But that's usually not the plot of the film. So that actually makes White a little bit different, and I thought it was kind of interesting. The plot line does use a few cliches of the cursed tape and investigation elements that you might see in other Asian ghost flicks, but it does avoid using the traditional Onryo ghost because the ghoul here is white-haired and looks and acts quite differently. The scare tactics are a mix of spooky videos, creepy lyrics and songs, a few jump scares, and some violent accident sequences that actually prove to be some highlights. So again, you have some familiar elements that are mixed in with some other stuff that helps to mix things up. You know what I mean? It's not just a straight up, cliche fest, so to speak. The acting and production values are solid, which is no surprise given the country of origin. So if you're a fan of contemporary Asian ghost films, I think you should check out White. If you're not a fan of contemporary Asian ghost films, it might be a little bit of a lower priority for you. But this is good. I liked it. I have it in my collection as well, as you've seen in my Asian DVD collection. So this is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, our next one here is a bit obscure. It's a bit obscure. Sorry if I'm a little thirsty tonight. I just had a big steak. So steaks make me thirsty. So we're going to deathpenalty.com from Japan. So is there someone out there you want killed? Perhaps they wronged you in some way, so you want them to suffer by dying in miserable fashion. If that's the case, then just visit a particular website and enter a group. Of the 6 group members, 1 is chosen by the site manager, and the other 5 members work together to murder the chosen one's target. So they take turns until every individual person's target is dead. So the purpose is so that each crime will not be so easily traceable to the person with the closest relationship to the victim. It's kind of like Strangers on a Train, except with more people involved. So it's kind of a little bit of an outlandish premise, and you're not quite sure how this would work in real life. But this is a good flick. Our protagonist works for a call girl agency and isn't exactly the nicest guy around, but the struggles of the girls does seem to bother his conscience to a degree. Not a likable person anyway, but he does have a certain sense of morality that plays an important part in his development as a character throughout the film. The coolest aspect, though, of this premise is that the characters rotate their duties. So if you were in this situation, sometimes you would be the killer. Other times, you would be the person who is responsible for acquiring the weapon and leaving it somewhere for the killer to pick up. Sometimes you would be the destroyer of evidence, so to speak, who must dispose of the dead body. So as viewers, we kind of follow our protagonist as he goes through his rotation to assist in these various murders. And as you might expect, this is a neat little film that holds one's attention. There are quite a few plot developments, and the premise itself provides a lot of content to work with. There's also an element of paranoia here because our protagonist is being monitored while participating. You know what I mean? Runtime is only 77 minutes long, which is an easy sit again. I liked the ending quite a bit too, mostly because it's kind of surprising and ironic. So in terms of negatives, though, this has a low budget. It's limited to certain sets and locations. You don't get a wide, a big scale type of film. Very limited sets and locations. Also, if you think about the premise a lot, there might be a few plot holes that you'll identify. If you're thinking, wait, if people really did this in real life, how would this really work? You know what I mean? But I did not think that distracted too much from the entertainment value. So, yet again, we have an interesting film tonight that's a little bit different, and I recommend this. Now, deathpenalty.com, you must think, is just an obscure film, right? Nope. It's widely available in the United States, and I almost couldn't believe it. I saw it on YouTube years ago, and I just checked the availability for this, this video tonight, and I'm like, what? It's on Amazon? That's ridiculous. So, hey, have at it. Now, our next film here we're covering out of order. It's technically a sequel. Well, actually, it's a prequel. I would have covered it in part 1 of this video, but it didn't make sense to cover until now. And that is deathpenalty.com, A New Beginning. Also released in 2011. So they did both of these films during the same year. Well, if deathpenalty.com is good, then A New Beginning must be worth watching, right? I don't know. I don't think so. It's not a remake of Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, so don't get those titles confused. But it is a prequel to the first deathpenalty.com film. And this movie seems to be a true prequel, too, which means that you should watch the original film first. So what's the plot in this? Well, the Strangers on a Train-style website of murder is kind of in development in this film. The protagonists meet at a lodge in a forest to perform a debugging, like an IT debugging project of the computer programs associated with this website. I'm not joking. This is the actual plot. And this is important because the protagonists contact one another via computer online in order to play the game. So you got to have a working site. And as you might expect, things do not go well here. And the IT support gets the worst kind of help desk ticket. Murder. Yeah, no, it's not very good. As I mentioned, I did not like it. But there are a few positives here. It begins well enough with a good unexpected opening sequence. Also, I kind of liked the use of green in this color. Like everything that was green was kind of accentuated in the color scheme, so I kind of like that. Unfortunately, the list of flaws just far outweigh any positives here. First and foremost, it de-emphasizes the interesting elements of the original film, meaning that there's not much emphasis on the people who are committing the murders. Instead, the film focuses almost entirely on the people who are getting murdered, opting instead for like a slasher-style format. But there's certain things you have to do well in a slasher, and this film does not do them. You know, it's not a problem per se to change it up here and do a slasher straight up, but it becomes a problem when the death scenes are as lame as they are here. Nothing memorable in that regard at all. A big no-no for a slasher film. Performances also far more underwhelming than the first film. The acting in the first film wasn't anything like great, but it was sufficient. I cannot say the same about A New Beginning. The characters are very obnoxious as well, which reminded me of like those lesser American slashers that you don't really want to watch. Script is weak, and the finale is drawn out and boring. So, only 71 minutes long, but it feels a lot longer, I'll tell you. And it's predictable, too. You know, there's one character that does something near the beginning, and you immediately know that they're in league with the killer. You know what I mean? So, yeah, don't watch the first deathpenalty.com movie. I guess if you're a really big fan of it and you want to check out the prequel, do it. Actually, I think they're in a 2-disc set on Amazon. So if you buy the first one, you actually get the second one anyway. So, have at it. I don't think it's too expensive. At least in America, it isn't. All right, where are we at? Our top 5 now. We got 5 left for this evening. We got some good ones. All right. So we arrive at the 9th installment of the Tomie franchise. Yes, I enjoyed 4 of the first 8 titles. So how does the next one rank when compared to the others? Well, let's take a look here, because it's time for Tomie Unlimited from Japan. Now, Wikipedia has a nice plot synopsis, so I'll do my, quote here. Tsukiko is a member of the photography club in high school. On her way home with a friend, Tsukiko runs into older sister Tomie, who goes to the same school. Tomie is also with a guy that Tsukiko has a secret crush on. But Tomie is then impaled by a steel cross that falls from a building under construction. 1 year later, Tsukiko still suffers nightmares over her sister's death, but her daily life eventually returns to some sense of normalcy. But on Tomie's 18th birthday, she miraculously returns, more beautiful than ever. Her parents are delighted, but Tsukiko is unable to believe it. So the last few Tomie films had a very low budget and felt very uncinematic. Thankfully someone signed Noboru Iguchi and gave him a bit more money to work with. And no, that's not a joke either, because Iguchi makes a lot of low-budget B movies, but Tomie Unlimited is certainly more cinematic in its production values when compared to the last 2 Tomie films. And there's no question that Iguchi infused some very important and welcome burst of energy into this one. Definitely an awkward tone to this one, though, which shifts between horrific and funny moments. And that it actually practices both at the same time sometimes, which I'm sure will leave some viewers just scratching their heads. But this movie is so outrageously demented that I find it hard for someone to deny that that's its best characteristic. You know what I mean? Real kind of an oddball film, even for a Tomie film. Iguchi does not really go all out on his style here. You know, this isn't a robo-geisha, you know what I mean, or something like that. You do get a dose of Iguchi-isms, so to speak, but he really kind of ratchets it down enough to keep Tomie Unlimited firmly within the horror genre and maintain just enough consistency with its franchise's prior installments. I mean, heck, I would say that the Tomie character here is more appropriate and consistent and relevant than in films like Tomie Another Face, Tomie Forbidden Fruit, or Tomie vs. Tomie. So it's definitely better than those three, I'll tell you that much. In terms of horror, I think the movie satisfies. Starts off with an aforementioned impalement scene and seemingly gets more outrageous and blackly comical as it progresses. Final 30 or so minutes in this are wonderfully demented and gleefully entertaining. Special effects are occasionally laugh-out-loud hilarious, but at the same time, they're quite unique. Was there a little bit of a sound there? I don't know what that was. I'm freaking myself out here. And there's some body horror imagery here that it's inspired by. So you get some really cool, like, I don't know if you would call them mutations, but you know, if you've seen Tomie films, she has different forms. The forms here are just ridiculous, but I liked them. There are some monster designs in this one that you will not see in any other film, and I really appreciate that level of creativity. This also gets sufficiently bloody at times, which I liked, in case you were wondering. In terms of content and story, there's not a whole lot here. It's a little bit on the flimsy side in that regard, but most Tomie films kind of are. And certain plot points, at times, I thought didn't really make a whole lot of sense, but there are a few lines of dialogue, mostly near the end, that do give you some things to think about. So, for example, there's one experience that Tomie has that's mirrored by our protagonist, and you get a glimpse of Tomie's motives overall as a character. And I would even say that it gives a slightly greater understanding of her character in the franchise. So, you know, I like that, and it preserves like her demonic nature as well. One random observation is that the music occasionally incorporates like a lighter 70s tone. I thought it was a little it had some similarities to House from 1977, which I thought was pretty interesting. Just something I noticed. And it's not often that you can claim that a ninth entry of a movie franchise is one of the better ones, but I think that's the case here. You know, remember, this is the movie that turned the whole franchise around for me. You know what I mean? And it's the first Tomie film that I liked on the first viewing, and that inspired me to watch some of the other ones, and I appreciate them more nowadays. So I definitely see myself returning to Tomie Unlimited in the future. It's entertaining stuff. DVD availability, it is available on Amazon streaming. Alright, our next one here. It's one from Takashi Shimizu. And it is called Tormented, also known as Rabbit Horror. This is from Japan, of course. A young mute woman, Hikari Mitsushima, and her brother, or younger half-brother, Daigo, live with their father, Kohei, who is a book illustrator. So one day, little Daigo inexplicably beats a rabbit to death outside his school and subsequently stops attending classes. Kiriko becomes worried for her little brother's behavior, while their father ignores the problem because he's caught up in his latest job. Unfortunately, though, the little boy is dragged into a closet by a full-sized rabbit monster and transported to a horrific alternate dimension. That's just bad luck, man. So can his sister figure out what's going on before the kid is turned into bunny food? Well, let's find out. So after his crappy last film, Shock Labyrinth, Takashi Shimizu rebounds nicely in this one. I mean, right from the opening credits, this movie is an improvement. with a spooky song and some good visuals. There's really nothing like really scary in this movie in terms of being like terrifying, but the horror imagery is creative and a lot of fun to watch, I think. There's an emphasis on dream logic, various forms of rabbits, an amusement park, and a nifty spiral staircase. There are some oddball, cool, creative interactions with the bunny monster, too. He has like two slightly different forms about him, which I liked. There's a blend of practical and digital effects, which I think works pretty good. There are a few CGI shots, though, that look pretty fake, but those are mostly when they use the little bunny rabbit. There's like a little stuffed bunny that the boy has, and sometimes it gets up and runs around. So you get a little bit of that, but for the most part, I kind of like the visuals and the effects in this. Psychological elements are borrowed heavily from other Asian horror films, so much so that this film it practically rips off some other Asian horror films, really. I mean, let's be honest. If you've seen your fair share of Asian horror, you'll see some similarities, and you'll be able to predict some of the plot developments because of that. But, in defense of Tormented, this, rip-off effect is alleviated to a degree because all of the twists are really revealed with over an entire half hour of runtime remaining in the film. So it doesn't end on that predictable twist. So that helps. If it ended on that predictable twist and the movie ended that way, it would be on a sour note. But it gets those out of the way, and then it does its own thing, And actually, it does its own thing throughout. It has its own creativities, mostly visually, that really add to the experience. Now, ironically, Tormented also has certain similarities to Shock Labyrinth, but it does everything better. It just does everything better. Hikari Mitsushima is good in the lead role, to no one's surprise. The bad guy from Creepy is in this, Teruyuki Kagawa, and it's nice to see him here as well. He's a good actor. So much of the film consists of symbolic alternate realities and dreams, which makes it a very brisk and entertaining experience. I mean, the film, really, when I rewatched it last week, is like one big horror sequence from start to finish. It really is. So the pacing in this I really liked. Christopher Doyle was the cinematographer on this, and his style definitely shines during the staircase sequence near the end. And finally, it's only 83 minutes long. This is 2011, people. Every horror film is under 90 minutes. It's like we're in Bizarro world. So, yeah, Tormented is a cool flick that flies right by, but you might be rolling your eyes a few times at some of the influences that it draws from. So Tormented is widely available on DVD, at least in the United States. All right, we got another interesting one here. There's some unorthodox stuff here tonight, which I like. This is another one not a whole lot of people know about, and that is Schoolgirl Apocalypse from Japan again. So after practicing some archery, a schoolgirl named Sakura finds herself under attack by zombies. Even more perplexing, though, is that she begins to have haunting visions of an odd-looking Caucasian boy who desperately needs her help, so he calls to her through his telepathy skills. So add in a psycho-human woman, and you've got sufficient conflict here. So Sakura ventures into the Japanese wilderness, eluding zombies and dangerous humans in order to find and save this boy. So I'm not sure if you would technically call this film really a zombie movie or an infected movie. I know some people like to delineate. I'm not really sure which ones they are. But you should have an idea of what to expect here in a zombie movie, right? Or do you? Maybe not. This is actually a very glacially paced mood piece more than anything else, with much of the runtime devoted to our protagonist, exploring abandoned woodland villages and buildings and stuff like that. It sounds boring, but it's actually highly atmospheric. The environments and ambient scoring are used properly to build a dense atmosphere. So when I watched Schoolgirl Apocalypse for the first time, and I was confronted with all this glacial pacing and moody atmosphere, I wondered why there aren't more Japanese zombie films like this. They made, at least back in the day, let's see, in the 90s, 2000s, You know the ones that we've covered before in this playlist. A lot of times we'll throw in some comedy in there. Like a lot of people like to throw comedy in zombie films. Zombie comedies really aren't really my bag. It's, my cup of tea, but there's a few that I like. And I really think that one would think that a general movie industry like Japan has an emphasis on quiet, dreamy creepiness, like in their ghost films and things like that. And that would translate, in theory, to this genre of horror, zombie films. But it's kind of a rarity to find a real creepy Japanese zombie film like this. That has the same qualities as their ghost films. But Schoolgirl Apocalypse is one of those examples of that happening. There's almost no comedy here at all. It takes itself very seriously. Another appealing aspect, too, is that there's some creativity here, and it's manifested in three ways, okay? Number one, the cause for the zombie outbreak is incredibly imaginative. Two, the zombie virus only affects men, leaving the women to fend for themselves. And three, there are some unorthodox animated dream sequences chucked in. Now, as I alluded to, not a whole lot really happens in this movie in terms of action. There are some zombie attacks mixed in, but only a small handful, you know what I mean? The director, in an interview I read, mentioned that he wanted to have an action scene with zombies every 10 to 15 minutes, but they did not have the budget to do it. So he restructured the script and focused more on the atmosphere and the lead character's, I guess, I don't know, you wouldn't really call it coming of age, so to speak, but just her journey, so to speak. So, not really that big of a deal. They adapted, and I think it worked. And the film was shot in less than 2 weeks, so it's one of those, almost like Mari Bito instances where, the director was under the gun and made something good anyway. Now, in terms of negatives, I mentioned the animated dreams. Very low-grade animation use for those. That could be a problem. But they're really meant to contrast all the live action stuff, and there's only a few of them. There's not many. It's why I didn't think it was a big deal. There's also some poor quality CGI near the end, but that could throw some viewers off. So Schoolgirl Apocalypse does generally get very good reviews online from what I've read, but I could see why someone may not like this. You know what I mean? The glacial pacing being the big problem, I think, for some people. But it still stands as a very original and interesting zombie film, and since I'm a sucker for dense atmosphere, I like this one quite a bit. Just be ready to, you go into it with the right expectations. This is no Train to Busan, people. It's not like nonstop action, or, it's no I Am a Hero, you know what I mean? But if you go in with the right mindset, I can see, a lot of people seem to enjoy this one. So Schoolgirl Apocalypse is widely available on DVD. Alright, we're down to our last two, and it's tough to choose between these two films. Both are very impressive, I think, and have a unique quality, a well-developed antagonist. We could probably consider it a tie, really, but if forced to choose, my second favorite Asian horror film from 2011 would be Gomenasai, also known as Ring of Curse, from Japan. That's about as generic of an American title as you can come up with. Ring of Curse, really? They should have just left it as Gomenasai, or I'm sorry. So a high school girl named Yuka believes that her classmate, Kurohane, is murdering people by using written words that coerce death. No, this isn't a Death Note, but I guess it has some similarities, right? So Kurohane is rather antisocial, but it's not really entirely her fault because of her dreary family life and the poor attitudes of her classmates who frequently intimidate her in class. Now, this girl is actually very smart and gets good grades, but now she's using her writing talents for revenge against these snobby girls. So will Yuka become another victim, or will she figure out a way to survive? So this film spins the curse subgenre of Japanese horror in a lot of different ways. First of all, the structure of the storyline is broken up into 3 diary entries, which portray the perspectives of 2 main characters. So there's ample use of narration during these scenes, which develops the characters very nicely, and there's some very interesting monologue and dialogue to be found here. Second, the method of killing kind of straddles the boundary between pure psychological manipulation and supernatural ability, which is very unique for a film of this kind. Like, I couldn't tell. You can't tell for a while. Like, is this some type of hypnotic type thing where she's hypnotizing people to kill themselves when they read her writing? Or is this actually a supernatural ability? And I wasn't quite sure for a while. So I thought that was really interesting. Third, this has a pretty vicious antagonist who is effectively developed and even relatable. In fact, there are some very effective, dramatically impactful moments involving the antagonist in this film. There's not that many horror films that provide something like that, and I definitely appreciated that successful attempt at creating a multidimensional villain. It certainly adds more depth to the film. In terms of other positives, there's a tempered creepiness. There's no Onryo ghosts in this at all, so it does avoid that cliche, despite having the title Ring of Curse. Performances are solid all around, and I really enjoyed the two lead actresses. The ending also uses a cliche. It actually uses a cliche and turns it on its head by providing a different reason for that particular act. And the ending message by the actresses is pretty amusing and ironic. So this movie has a lot going for it, I think. Runtime, take a guess. 85 minutes. What is it with 2011 and runtimes? It's just bizarre. And almost all of the scary moments actually occurred during the daytime, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, definitely recommend Gomenasai. Very solid movie. This one actually improved quite a bit after a second viewing when I watched it last week. I was like, man, this movie's really good. So watch it. It's widely available on DVD. At least in the United States it is. Alright, so the best Asian horror film of 2011. What could beat Gomenasai? Well, I may have one here. And it is called The Road. So it was kind of a tough decision between the two, but if forced to choose, I picked The Road. This is from the Philippines. The Philippines just coming out of nowhere here. I haven't really talked about many Filipino horror films from this particular year, and they got the #1 spot. 3 teenagers go missing on an abandoned road after a joyride gone wrong. Luis is a police investigator assigned to the case. In the course of his investigation, he finds the remains of another victim on the same abandoned road. The corpse is later identified as one of the 2 sisters who disappeared a decade before. So Luis must dig deeper into the secrets and mysteries of the ghosts lingering in the dark and desolate pathway in order for him to find the 3 missing teens. As the mystery unravels, he discovers a history of brutality and murders that will shake him to his core. So this film is divided into 3 segments here. First story kind of concerns the 3 young teenagers who drive down this desolate road at night. Then the next 2 stories are flashbacks that show the historical acts of violence that are connected to the modern day hauntings. Style here is very professional, great photography, eerie scoring, and solid performances all around. Beautifully shot film, and the ambient music is very unnerving actually. Even the opening credits are dense with atmosphere. I liked it. Very high quality affair on all levels here. Deliberate pacing and depressing mood will likely wear the viewers down over time, and that's a good thing. It's a trait that I find to be a very positive quality about this film because it is consistently grounded in human-inflicted suffering against other people. So there's a lot of emotional torment in this movie for the victims, and that makes everything more impactful. In fact, the human antagonist is multi-layered, and you will certainly hate him at times, but you'll also understand him at times. So that's, again, it adds complexity and depth to this. This film has kind of a relentless, dramatic edge to it from start to finish, and that includes both the horror and the drama. In fact, the ending is effective on an emotional level as well. I mean, the horror elements, there's no, rampant gore here, but the violence is portrayed in kind of a grimy way, so that's good. It's unnerving. The horror sequences are lengthy, too, by the way. Very early on, there's an effective scene with some nasty-looking ghouls who look like mutilated human beings. So, yeah, It was good. But the ghostly phenomena is rather limited here. I want to make that point because, again, much of the focus here is directed towards the dark side of humanity. Script is very neat and easy to understand. Just make sure that you pay attention to the details of what's happening because there are visual references between the different periods. So is there anything wrong with this movie? I don't know. Not a whole lot came to mind when I rewatched it. I will say that there's a very short car chase scene near the beginning, and it felt a little awkward just because the cars were moving so slow. I mean, they had kids driving the cars, so I guess they didn't want them to drive fast down this, But it was a little awkward. But it's like the only awkward scene in the whole film, and it doesn't last very long. Now, the director here, by the way, is Yam Laranas, the man who previously gave us The Echo from 2004, another very good Filipino horror film. So The Road, I think, is even better than that film, in my opinion. So check this one out. It's good. And it is moderately available on DVD. All right, so that's 2011 in Asian horror. Probably one of the weaker years in recent memory, but there's still some good stuff here, as well as a pretty decent variety, actually. If you like movies with shorter runtimes, then you're going to be pleased, because it seemed to be a big trend for this year, for some unknown reason. And, contemporary Asian horror has a lot to offer when it's still interesting to cover a down year, so to speak, such as this. So be sure to join me in my next video in this playlist. We're going to crack into and dive deep into 2012. We've got more movies to cover than 2011. There was more movies that I watched in 2012 compared to 2011, but oh boy, do we have some dumpster juice to swim through in part 1, baby. I'm going to hit you right at the first movie we cover. I'm hitting you with one of the absolute worst Asian horror films from the last 20 years. I might actually rewatch it just to make sure that's the case. You want to watch it. And as always, we will see you next time.